Oh yeah, that is Shamatha.
Okay, so let's begin by greeting and welcoming everyone to this session. So, touch delay to everyone. And today and tomorrow, we're going to have this class about calm abiding and how to cultivate the concentration that leads to calm abiding, how to actually train, how to meditate on this. And it is much easier if we do it by relying on this drawing is a means of a very good educational means, because when you have a drawing that represents the different states of concentration, it is easier for those things to arise in your mind, to stick in your mind, to comprehend them in a different manner. So we will definitely be relying on this picture today to guide us through the different levels and stages of meditation. So, together with the greetings, the welcoming everyone, it is at the beginning, it is very important that we all adjust the motivation, especially because the subject matter is calm abiding, how to develop concentration, how to progress gradually through the various stages of concentration to develop this. And in order to derive the maximum benefit of these teachings, and for those teachings to be beneficial, it is very important that at the beginning we set our motivation. It would be excellent if your motivation could be influenced by renunciation, by bodhicitta, by correct view. Setting the motivation is something that is very important for the listener as well as for the teacher. It is not just the case that the audience, the students have to adjust the motivation. The teacher also has to adjust the motivation, because if the teacher adjusts the motivation, then all this detailed and extensive presentation will bring about great benefit. But without the right motivation, it doesn't matter how long the presentation goes on for, how detailed it will just not bring the same benefit. And similarly, from the side of the students might listen very carefully, take notes, be very attentive, but if that is not done with the right motivation, again, all this information and attentiveness, all this listening will not bring about the maximum benefit. Therefore, it is very important to set the motivation. The first step in setting the motivation is really to take refuge, because refuge is what will make this practice a Buddhist practice. Refuge is what delineates between Buddhist and non Buddhist. And definitely, we want to make sure that the practice, the activity, is Buddhist activity. Then, following that, another excellent motivation and a thought to be influenced by is the thought of renunciation. Because if you're influenced by this, the activity becomes the cause for liberation. Another excellent thought to influence your motivation is bodhicitta, because with bodhicitta, the activity becomes the cause for attaining the state of omniscience. So, accordingly and according to your capacity, please adjust your motivation at the appropriate level. So, today it's all about calm abiding. And the thing with calm abiding is that actually we don't pay enough attention to calm abiding. We hear about calm abiding quite a lot, calm abiding here, calm abiding there. But from our own side, we have not made the effort to really pay attention to the importance of calm abiding. Like, what sort of loss or what sort of mistake is there if we don't obtain calm abiding? Or what sort of qualities, what sort of benefits they would come if we did obtain calm abiding? And because we don't really know the distinction between those things, we don't understand those things, we don't have a sense of loss, thinking, oh, I haven't obtained calm abiding so far, I should definitely do it. So, first of all, we need to talk about the benefits, the importance of calm abiding, to open up our eyes to this area, how important it is. All right, so let's begin by giving a story that illustrates the importance of CalmAbiding. There was a king who was he had the reputation for being very angry, very impatient, and he always wanted to, if he said something, he really needed to be obeyed. And one day the king called a meeting of all the ministers. And the king wanted everyone to attend without exception. And he says, if anyone does not come or if anyone arrives late, I will kill that person. There will be there will be no exceptions, no apologies, no reason for not attending this meeting. So, as you can imagine, all the ministers made sure that they arrived, that they showed up early, they showed up on time, except for one. And that person was actually a meditator. And at that point, at that time, he was meditating on CalmAbiding. So he was in that deep state of concentration. He didn't hear the proclamation of the king. He was not aware that there was a meeting happening. And he was just in his meditation session. So, of course, when the king entered the assembly hall and he asked, is everybody here? Is everyone present? So they did a count and they could see that there was one missing. And the king said, who is this person missing? Send someone, send the guards to bring him here, because as I have said, whoever is not attending this meeting, I will kill this person. So the guards went off and they brought this meditator. They interrupted his session. They dragged him into the meeting in front of the king. And the king says, what do you have to say for yourself? And the meditator said, it's not that I disrespect the king. It's not that I don't consider the council here of the other ministers to be important, but I was cultivating concentration on CalmAbiding. And during that concentration, is like you cannot hear anything. You're oblivious to what is happening around you, and therefore I didn't get the message. I didn't hear. I didn't know that we had a meeting, and that's the only reason I didn't attend. So the king was quite suspicious. He said, how can you talk about this type of concentration that when you enter it you do not hear anything? He says, I don't believe it. And he said, look, we can test it. This is something that I can prove. I can test this. And the king said, how are we going to test this? How are you going to prove this? He said, okay, so they discussed this, and they says, listen, if someone walks from here all the way up to the palace, so the palace was up on the hill, carrying a big pot filled with melted butter, and that person doesn't spill not even one drop of butter whilst they are walking up to the palace and they reach the destination, then that will be, that will show that if you pay close attention, if you have if you're concentrated on the task, you don't pay attention to other things. But to really test that the attention of the person would not be diverted, they organized so that all the way along the path, there will be music, sort of like a festival performance, everything that could actually distract the mind of the person from the task of carrying that pot filled with the liquid. So the king said, all right, if you reach up to the palace without having spilled one drop of the liquid, I will give you the highest position amongst all my ministers. However, if you spill even one drop, I will kill you. So that was the experiment, the way of testing whether there is concentration that can make you focus on your task without hearing. And once you do this, you don't hear anything. So obviously, the person who was carrying that pot was, as you can understand, was very anxious, was very nervous, because he knew that if he failed, he would be killed. On the other hand, he knew that if he completed the task perfectly without being distracted, he will be rewarded with the highest position in the cabinet. So the person walked with single pointed concentration, like very, very carefully, all the way up to the palace without spilling a drop. And when he got there, they asked him and he said, they said, what about the music? Did you like the music? And he said, what music? Like, of course, he didn't pay attention to all these distractions along the road. So the thing was with calm abiding, it is like this. If you do not develop calm abiding, it's like having the sentence of death because you remain within cyclic existence. If you obtain calm abiding, you obtain a very high status because calm abiding will allow you to progress along the 5 paths and the 10 grounds and reach your whatever aim you want to achieve. So this illustrates how much you lose if you don't cultivate calm abiding, how much you obtain, how much you gain if you obtain calm abiding.
어저선 결혼서다 로규기 남네만 삼당도 올라 신의 색인디 아니 개침보 가지 이면디 다 보고 유지르스 로규기 남니 셰바 인상고 고대부요래 디인상 신의 마토나 만절로 제제요 말에 신의 디 사된다고 지레 안 디간라 신의 강바자고 오래 당간조 강바자도 람가 숨정아 년퇴가 람이네다 라제가 람이네다 태바침be 람이네다 아니 사주 람가 간지지 저고 있네 신의 마토발라 제제요 말에 어다디 인상 신의디 녀버도 고외토네 아니다 야가지간라 야 람주 람줄레게 안산지 요고본토 고르마도 신의면은 제제요 말에 신의 줄라마게나 양요 코와나 코르제 람디 매바 인상 어디 코르데야 돼 디인상디 개침부 시우지 인상 다당고 시내세 그로 치코랑기 돈에 고된지당 시내세긴데 가르라고 유미 세딜라 아니 지시지슈기 is.
So you can actually contemplate that story, and if you do this, you will see how important calm abiding is. Calm abiding is actually the ground upon which we walk. It's like the platform, what supports you. So any progress that we make along the 15 paths, which are the 5 paths of the hearers, the 5 paths of the solitary realizers, the 5 paths of the bodhisattvas, and all the grounds, the 10 grounds that we obtain, all the way up to omniscience. All of this is resting upon calm abiding. Without calm abiding, you don't have the foundation to develop all this. And if you don't develop all this, it means you just remain within cyclic existence, going over the same things over and over again. All right, so that's the importance of calm abiding. So let's look at the meaning of the term. So let's first of all look at the term calm abiding. We have 2 words, the calm and the abiding. Calm here indicates pacification. So you have pacified something, you have made something non-existent, you have taken out of the picture. And the other term is to abide, remain, as in the sense that you place something and it remains there. So the 2 words together, calm, abiding, refer to a particular type of concentration that we have when we remove obstacles, so that finally we come to the point of pacifying all the conceptual, all the misconceptions of the mind and all the suffering, all the difficulties and resistance of the body, and remain with a very stable concentration upon a single-pointedly upon a focal object. Okay, so as we say, we are going to follow the illustrations that we have here. So in this particular tanka, right. There's a couple of things to mention here. That when you first see that drawing, which illustrates how to obtain calm abiding, it should give you the idea that you are in a landscape, you are in an environment that is very peaceful. It's an isolated place, and it's all about discipline. So in the past, when they used to do this drawing, there wouldn't be any additional elements, such as, for example, flowers and trees and things like this. These are additional elements, artistic elements, that were added to the drawing later on. So the drawing should be very plain because it should communicate this idea of an isolated place, that it's not busy, but it's very quiet. All right, okay, so let's look at the different elements in this drawing. At the bottom right, you will see a building. The building actually illustrates two things. On one level, it illustrates that all the different favorable conditions, all the causes that you must rely upon in order to develop calm abiding. So in that, you need to have the right location, you must have little desire, and so on and so forth. There's actually a list of 6 causes, but Geshe was saying if we were to go into detail on the causes of calm abiding, then that itself takes quite a bit of time, and it will take away from the time that we have for presenting the actual way to develop calm abiding. So if we get the time, we will go into this. But for the time being, just keep in mind the building illustrates the different favorable conditions and the causes that you must have in place. And you can say that it also illustrates the place in which you meditate. Okay, outside the building, you have a monk, and the monk illustrates the meditator, the person who practices in order to develop calm abiding. Now, in reality, the monk should be, or the meditator should be inside the building, right? Because you're meditating inside the building. But for illustration purposes, because we want to show this progression, and we couldn't illustrate all this if it had to be inside the building, we have moved all the activity and the monk, the meditator, outside of the house. So that's for illustration purposes. So we say here that the monk represents the meditator, the person who tries to obtain calm abiding. That actually should not be taken too strictly, meaning that only if you are ordained you can develop calm abiding. Anyone can meditate and obtain calm abiding. However, this painting was very famous in Tibet, and in Tibet, traditionally, the practitioners, or those who had the time and practice very diligently, were ordained. And this is why the meditator is illustrated as an ordained person. Okay, so then beyond the building and beyond the monk or the meditator, we see the elephant, the black elephant. What does that animal symbolize? It actually symbolizes the mind of the meditator. So the question here is, like, why did they choose the elephant? They could have chosen another animal. Why the elephant? So they have chosen the elephant because the elephant is difficult to tame, and once it's tame, it's a very powerful animal. So it has these two characteristics. And in that sense, it comes to symbolize very well the state of our mind. Our mind is very difficult to tame. It's very difficult to keep the mind from roaming around. The mind does not stay with our chosen focal object, but at the same time, the mind is very powerful. Now, one thing about this elephant in the picture, the elephant in the picture must be a wild elephant, not an elephant that has already been, let's say, domesticated or trained and so forth. It should be like a crazy wild elephant, a type of animal that you cannot handle, and it is even, dangerous to come near it. So sometimes you might find variations of that same picture. The reason for that is that those who meditate are not very good at drawing. Those who are artists are not necessarily meditators, so they don't necessarily understand the fine points that need to be communicated. So keep in mind here, this element is a black, wild, untamed elephant, a dangerous, very strong animal. The other element is that you see that the black elephant that symbolizes the mind of the meditator and the monk that symbolizes the meditator, they're not standing next to each other. Actually, there is a big distance, geographical distance between the two. You see that in between them, you have a big river and you have a bridge. So actually the elephant, which is the mind, is far away from the meditator. And this symbolizes the state of our mind as beginners. You could be inside the house, sitting on your cushion, meditating. However, your mind is not in the same room with you. Your mind is roaming. Your mind has reached a long distance, is outside somewhere else. This is the state of our mind as beginners. And Geshe was saying, even here, there are all these people in the same room. We're in the same room. Is our mind also in the same room? Because, sometimes, the mind, you realize that your mind is far away from where you're sitting. So there's a big distance in the beginning between the meditator and the mind of the meditator. They're not near. They're not in the same location. Now, in front of the elephant, you see another animal that is the monkey. What does the monkey represent? The monkey represents mental excitation, excitement, distraction. All right. So you might ask, why choose the monkey? Perhaps we could have chosen another animal. So the thing with mental excitation is that your mind does not stay on the virtuous focal object that you have chosen. Instead, the mind is roaming around, is very quickly moving from one object to the next. And this is very well represented by the monkey, because the monkey has this agility. The monkey is just jumping around all the time, from branch to branch, from tree to tree, from the tree to the ground, from the ground up to the tree again, and so on and so forth. So very quickly jumping from one place to the other. So therefore it comes to symbolize movement very, very well. And it symbolizes here the biggest obstacle, the worst obstacle that we have when we try to develop the concentration of CalmAbiding, and this is mental excitation. Okay, when we talk about mental excitation, we need to understand that it comes in different levels of grossness and subtlety. So when we talk about mental excitation, it can come to the point where instead of staying, you're supposed to, the task is you have one job to do, to stay with the focal object, isn't it? But instead of doing this, because you follow another object that you find much more interesting, much more attractive, you have this mental excitement about something else, you forget your focal object, you move away from the focal object, you lose your focal object, you go totally outside, beyond the focal object. If you forget and lose the focal object, this is the case of coarse excitement. There is another case where excitement is subtle. So when it is subtle, actually you don't forget, you don't lose the focal object. You're still staying with the focal object. However, a corner of your mind is entertaining, is following another attractive object, another object that you find still more attractive. So in this case, it is a bit more difficult to identify because it is like water that keeps running under a layer of thick ice. So because the water is running under the ice, you're not aware that you have these undercurrents going. It is very important to be able to recognize coarse and subtle excitement, because when we come to the actual part, the actual meditation session, where we try to cultivate the concentration, this mental excitement, whether gross or subtle, will be the biggest obstacle that we have. So this point of identifying gross and subtle excitement, as we say, it is very crucial. It's very important when we try to develop the concentration. This is the one thing that we struggle with. There is quite a lot of, and also there's quite a lot of discussion was in the presentation. Is there excitement? Is there mental sinking? Have you lost the focal object? Are you still with the focal object? So this is something that comes up again and again as we examine how we progress when we develop this concentration. And ultimately, this is the thing that we struggle with, the thing that we have to stop. So let's explain it once more to make sure that we are absolutely clear. When you try to cultivate this concentration, you have a focal object. And what you have to do is you have to remain focused. You have to stay with the focal object. You have to remember what your focal object is. But if you come to the point where you have lost your focal object, it means you have forgotten what the focal object is. It means your mind is so distracted, you have gone completely somewhere else, isn't it? So obviously, this is the case of gross mental excitement. There are other cases where you have not lost the object. You're still with the object. However, you're not engaging the object with 100% of your capacity. You're only, let's say, 75% engaged with the object. The other 25% of your attention, of your engagement has declined. So when you have that about, 25% of decline, then we're talking about subtle mental excitement. So what is happening at this point is that a corner of your mind has decided to follow another object that you find more attractive. So it is through the afflictive desire or attachment for some attractive object, whether it is form or sound or smell or taste or whatever. 25% of your mind is distracted, is following that secondary attractive object. The other 75% remains with the object, so you haven't completely lost the object. So if it is this case, it is a case of subtle mental excitement. So we need to understand what type of energy we're talking about here when we have mental excitement. With mental excitement, your mind is hyperactive, right? So it's like you're very high, you have all this energy, and you are distracted. You are following other objects, all right? So you become scattered. So this scattering of the mind in different object, in another object, is mental excitement. If we want to see how mental excitement is described in the Ornament of Sutras, it says it is a type of mind that enjoys and follows an attractive object, and therefore it is classified in the area of attachment. It makes the mind unclear. Its function is to act as an obstacle for developing CalmAbiding. Awesome. Okay, we have another animal that we see in the drawing, and that is the rabbit. The rabbit, it's a bit further up, if you go a couple of curves up. The rabbit actually represents mental sinking. And so mental sinking is happens when the mind becomes very heavy. So it's the opposite of what we were saying before. Before the mind was very high. Here the mind has become very heavy. And with this heaviness, there is this mental sinking. And that mental sinking brings unclarity, it brings dimness. So it's similar to when we go to sleep. You know, when you're very sleepy and you cannot keep your eyes open, it's like your eyes are closing, and you experience this, you know, dimness. Right? Things are not clear. You cannot engage. You cannot see things clearly anymore. Things turn black. You go to sleep even. Okay. So there's that laziness, that heaviness, that unclarity. So the whole thing here, when you cultivate concentration, is that you must maintain clarity of the object. You must be able to see the object clearly. And to do this, the mind must maintain a certain level. But if you go beyond that level, if the mind is too heavy, it means you lose the clarity of that object. So again, mental sinking becomes a big obstacle when we try to cultivate the concentration that leads to calm abiding. Okay, now the question, why did they choose the rabbit to represent this? Well, because apparently the rabbit sleeps a lot. So after it spends some time and energy to secure the food, once the stomach of the rabbit is full, all they want to do is rest and sleep. So the rabbit to represent here mental sinking. Mm. Now, in the Hindu tradition, when they say in the story of Ramayana, there's another animal that sleeps for 6 months, right? Kumkara. Okay. No, sorry, it's not. I'm sorry. I'm not very good with the Ramayana. It's not an animal. It's actually a person. So for 6 months, he didn't participate in the war that was happening. Was not fighting at all because he was asleep for 6 months. So Geshe was saying, okay, that would be a good another individual to represent mental sinking. All right. Again, as we did before, we have classification into coarse and subtle sinking. So when you have coarse mental sinking, you still remember the focal object, and which means you abide, you have abidance, you have stability. However, you don't have clarity, and you do not have the sharpness or the tightness of clarity that is required. So it is important to understand that clarity is something that it is crucial when we cultivate this concentration. You must be able to clearly see the object. If the clarity is missing, you have coarse mental sinking. And then we look at the subtle mental sinking. The subtle mental sinking is you have abundance and you have clarity, but the sharpness of that clarity is not 100%. So you have the clarity. So when you have clarity, there's a particular way that you're holding the object, you're engaging the object, like how sharp your focus is on the object. So a percentage of that has declined. And when that happens, then you have subtle mental sinking. So there is an interesting point here as we describe all this. We need to understand that if the mind becomes too high, too energized, we have mental excitement. If the mind becomes too low, we will have mental sinking. But also, if we have great clarity, There is some excitement that comes when you have great clarity, and that brings mental excitation. Or if you lose your clarity and you have dimness, that brings you down. So you have mental sinking. So as you see, here, somehow you have to find the right balance between the right amount of clarity, the right level of alertness, the right level of tightness. Because if you overdo it, you end up with mental excitement. If you have less than what is required, you end up with mental sinking. But to find the right balance, to find exactly the correct amounts, the correct recipe, if you want, this is something that no one can verbally express to you. No one can say, okay, and if you have that much, this is the right amount. If you don't have that, this is not the right amount. These are not things that can be verbally expressed in an accurate manner. Like we can describe them in a general way, but we cannot be accurate about it. Therefore, it is our task to search for those things and find them out of our own experience. So you have to sit down and meditate and say, okay, let me try to cultivate this type of concentration. And then you have to be observant and say, oh, okay, now I notice I got distracted. My mind got overexcited. Okay, so that must be too much. Or I noticed I started getting this dimness, this heaviness. The mind is heavy. I lost the object. I fell asleep, whatever. So you say, yeah, out of your own experience, you will be able to find this is too high, this is too low, this is where that is the right level to maintain. And when you have a certain level that you think is satisfactory, actually, there's no one you can go and ask and say, is this good enough? Is my concentration good enough? Is my clarity good enough? Who are you going to ask about this? Who is going to understand your question? Perhaps there is a case. You could say that you could go and ask someone who has clairvoyance, but then again, this person must have the experience of themselves having cultivated calm abiding. Otherwise, they would not know what you're talking about and if you are at the right level. So this is something for us to look for, to investigate. This is something that we have to find through the experience of our own personal meditation. Don't expect someone else to give you the accurate, precise description of the level of clarity that you need to have. Mm-hmm. So what we do here, in order to cultivate calm abiding, we need to cultivate particular type of concentration. So when you try to cultivate this concentration, what are you searching for? What do you want to achieve? You need to achieve two things. One is stability, and the other one is clarity. But of course, there is the question, do I have the right amount of stability? Is this enough? Is this too little? What about my clarity? Is it sharp enough? Is it not sharp enough? Has it declined? It has declined by how much? What is the percentage? Exactly what, how much have I lost? How much do I need to increase it? Right? As we say, this is not something that can be verbally expressed. You cannot go and ask this question to somebody else. This is, you cannot describe it to other people, but this is something that you need to find through your own personal experience. If you actually find the right balance, if you cultivate the right quality, the right amount of abidance, of stability, and the right amount and right quality of clarity, then you will be able to reach the ninth level of mental placement. This is not yet calm abiding, but it is very similar to calm abiding. Once you obtain the ninth level, from there you will be able to obtain calm abiding. But in order to reach this point, you must have found this perfect combination, totally perfectly calibrated stability, and clarity. So the way that this is described is by saying that you have to find the perfect point, the perfect balance between the mind. The mind should not be too loose and it should not be too tight. And to explain this, to show that you have to find it through your experience, they say it is similar to the example of the person who plays a string instrument like the piwang or like the guitar. So the strings of the instrument, if they are too tight, they don't produce a good sound. And if they're too loose, again, the sound is not correct. So you see the player is striking the chord, is striking the string, and is listening to the sound that it is producing. If it is not the right sound, they might tighten up the string a bit. And then they strike the string again, and they listen to the sound. And if they need to loosen it up or tighten it up a little bit, they keep doing this a few times and keep playing, striking the chord and listening to the sound. So this is the example that actually illustrates how you have to listen carefully. You find it through your own experience. It's not that someone would say, oh, this is the right tightness of the string. The person who plays the instrument has to find this and has to find the right tension in the strings. So it's similar with the mind, not too loose, not too tight. As you will see, the monk is holding something in each one of his hands. On one hand, he's holding a lasso, a rope and a lasso, and on the other hand, he is holding a hook. These two things represent recollection for the lasso and introspection for the hook. And if you want to cultivate this type of concentration that leads to CalmAbiding, it is absolutely necessary that you employ, that you rely upon recollection and introspection. So remember here that we're dealing with the crazy elephant of our mind that is roaming free. The first step in taming the elephant is to make the elephant stay in one place. So we have the focal object, and the focal object is like a pillar. So what you want to do is you want to tie the elephant of your mind to that pillar. And in order to tie the elephant to the pillar, you need a rope. And that is the rope of recollection. Also, if the mind goes away from the focal object, you need to be able to remember what is your focal object and bring back the elephant or the mind back into the focal object. So that is one instrument. The other instrument is the hook. And traditionally, the hook is used by the people who tame the elephants, and they employ it in the area behind the ears of the elephant where the skin is a bit thinner. In order to direct, they sort of like, it's like you're giving a command to the elephant and you direct the elephant to go one way or another. This represents introspection. Because as we say, as you try to cultivate this concentration, there will be times where you have mental excitement or mental thinking. So introspection is the one who is checking, do I have this? Do I have the other? What I need to do? Are they present? Is it a serious case? And so forth. So the two implements that we need to rely upon. We see in the text called The Essence of the Middle Way by Master Baba Viveka. He employs there the example, the metaphor of the crazy elephant. And Geshe was saying, I think we will explain the passage, but I think this is from where this symbolism and eventually this drawing has originated from. So there he says, you need the wild elephant of your mind does not remain in the pillar of your focal object, but chooses to take the wrong path. So he describes here the state of an undisciplined mind that does not stay with the focal object, but instead goes to a wrong path, meaning it follows various objects of desire, attractive objects of forms and sounds and smells and so forth. It gets distracted. So it says you must, to discipline the crazy elephant of your mind, you must tie it with the rope of recollection onto the stable pillar. So the pillar here is the pillar of the focal object, and we need to have the rope, the analogy of the rope, which is for recollection, to remain, to stay together, to stay next to the focal object. And he says you need to employ the iron hook of wisdom. The iron hook of wisdom here means that you analyze all the time and you say, where is my mind? Has my mind gone outside? Is it here? Is it coming? Is it staying? So you employ these two, the iron hook of wisdom, of introspection, really, to analyze and find what is happening with your mind. So, as we say here, when we develop this type of concentration, we are looking for two things. First of all, is like, do I remain? Do I have stability, abidance with my focal object or not? And who is going to guarantee this? This is going to come about through recollection. If you can remember the focal object, it means you are staying with the focal object. The second question that we are asking is, do I have clarity or not? So who is going to give you this information? It is actually introspection that will tell you whether you have mental excitement or mental laxity. So first of all, let's look at this recollection that we're talking about, meaning you remember the object, the focal object. So we can use the general term recollection of memory, but not in the general sense, like, oh, I remember this, I remember that, I remember this object, I remember this occasion. No. So here, recollection means that you have cultivated a continuum of that focal object and you have uninterrupted continuum. It means you have continuity of that focal object. You go from the first moment of the object to the second, to the third, to the fourth. So it's not that you have sort of like a sporadic remembering the object for a very short time. We don't want this. Recollection means you have a stream continuity. Actually, they say that in terms of recollection, we're looking here for a recollection that must have three characteristics. The first one, it means that you are recalling an object that you are already familiar with. You have previously familiarized yourself with, and you're recalling the object. That's the first characteristic. The second one is that you do not enter non-virtuous objects. And the third one is that the way that you're holding the object is tight enough. It has tightness, right? So if your recollection has these three characteristics, then you are going to have this stream, this continuity. We don't want interruptions. We want continuity. Okay. How do you develop recollection? How do you improve your recollection? So first of all, you improve it and you increase it through familiarity. And that means you have to go through the struggle. You focus on the focal object, you lose the focal object. So you make the effort to bring back the mind to the focal object. So this is remembering the focal object. You get distracted again, you bring it back again. You get distracted again, you bring it back again. And every time you do this, you increase the capacity of your recollection. So this is the first one, recollection, remembering, staying with the focal object. The second one, as we say, is introspection. Introspection is like a spy. Introspection is spying, like, do I have this fault? Do I have this obstacle? Okay. But obviously, this is a function of the mind, but you cannot employ this whilst you are meditating on your actual session. Because in your actual session, all your attention must be on the focal object. If you take your attention away from the focal object and start saying, oh, let me check, do I have this? Do I have that? Is this fault? It means you've lost the focal object. So you ruined your concentration. Okay, so actually introspection is not happening at the time that you're meditating. So that indicates that you must be prepared with introspection prior to beginning your actual meditation, right? So very strongly at the very beginning of the session, so either before you begin the session or at the very beginning, you employ introspection very strongly, and you really thoroughly examine to ascertain the quality of your clarity, and then you have to disengage it. And then perhaps periodically from time to time you might examine, but usually you do it at the beginning, and you do it with intensity at the beginning, and then you go into your focal object, and that intense examination at the beginning has the power to carry out through your session. Okay, so we say that we will develop this concentration through attaining 9 mental placements. And as you can see, we will have this elephant appearing 9 times to indicate the 9 mental placements. I mean, we have additional for CalmAbiding and special insight, but there are at least 9 illustrations of that elephant. So at the very beginning, the first instance that we see this elephant, the elephant is totally black. So at this illustration actually signifies the first mental placement, which is called setting the mind inwardly. So instead of the mind being distracted outside all the time, now you find a focal object and you tell the mind, come on, stay with this focal object. So you set the mind inwardly. However, in terms of duration, this first mental placement is almost the same as having no duration. It's almost the same as not having the focal object. Like you cannot stay with the focal object at all, or you stay for such a short period of time that almost we cannot measure it. So in terms of giving a number from 1 to 10, you are on 0. So because you have no abidance, no stability, the elephant is totally black. Then we see the second time we see the elephant, we notice that the head of the elephant begins to turn white. So this one now illustrates the second type of mental placement, which is called continuous setting. So the first was setting, the second one is continuous setting. And you can see that here we have extended a little bit the amount of time that we can remain. We have a little bit of stability with the focal object. All right, so that's the main difference between the first and the second mental placement. Okay, so as we say, during the first mental placement, you only engage the object and remain with the object for a very short time. So what is important here is to understand how to schedule your meditation session. From the beginning, do not seek to have a very long meditation and do not look for clarity. Do the exact opposite. Have very short sessions and many of them. So it says the instruction is many and short. Okay, so the duration of the session has to be very short. Why? Because your ability to stay with the focal object is very short. So you just do a very short session, you stop, you come out, you come back again. And that means that, your mind at this point has the capacity to just stay with the object for a very short time, but you go back and do it again and again and again. And by doing this, you're building up your familiarity. Okay. So there is a way of measuring if you have reached the first placement, the first mental placement, which is setting the mind inwardly. And that is if you are able to stay with the focal object for the time that it takes to count 21 breaths. So breath here is the whole circle of exhalation and inhalation. This counts as one. So the time that it would take you to have 21 breaths, if you can stay for that long with your focal object, then you have obtained the first mental placement, setting the mind. Okay, then to progress to the second level, we say that with the second mental placement, we have some improvement in terms of the duration of how long we can stay with the object. So they say here that it is similar to the amount that it takes you to recite one mala of Om Mani Padme Hum. But Geshe says, don't be fooled, because sometimes Om Mani Padme Hum we recite very quickly. So it has to be a very leisurely recitation of Om Mani Padme Hum. In any case, the duration of the second has to be longer than what the time it takes you to count 21 breaths. Okay. Okay, so as we say here for the first one, to achieve the first one, setting the mind inwardly, in order to even reach that stage, you have to rely upon the power of something, and that is the power of hearing. The power of hearing here indicates that you rely upon a teacher, you have a spiritual guide, you go and meet this person, and the spiritual guide will give you instructions. They will explain to you the way of achieving CalmAbiding, how to choose your focal object, and so on and so forth. They will give you instructions. So you need to receive these instructions and then apply these instructions to your meditation. This is how the first type of mental placement, the first level, is achieved, through the power of hearing. Okay, so you have the instructions, and in general, you think you want to meditate on CalmAbiding. However, you find that the very first obstacle that you encounter is laziness. Okay, so laziness is very strong in the beginning, and this is something that really we have to counteract. So first of all, we have to recognize the different types of laziness. There is the first type of laziness, the laziness of procrastinating, thinking, yes, I will do it, but after I finish this and this and that. Okay, so you waste up your time with other activities. Another type of laziness is the laziness that comes from being attracted to other worldly activities or other types of activities, such as, for example, I don't know, going for a walk or doing some drawing, doing some painting, doing some singing, or something like this. So you're attracted to other activities rather than prioritizing your meditation. And the third type of laziness is the laziness that comes from deprecating yourself, which is basically putting yourself down, thinking, CalmAbiding, who, me? I'm not a great meditator. I have no experience. I'm not an intelligent person. How could someone like me ever be successful in developing CalmAbiding? Anyway, there are many types of laziness, and in order to overcome them, we must rely on 4 different types of antidotes. Mm. So, as we say, laziness is a very big problem because basically it doesn't allow you, it stops you from engaging concentration. Because it is such a big problem, we are given a list of 4 antidotes to overcome laziness. And those are listed as faith, aspiration, exertion, and pliancy. So we have a list of 4, but from those 4, the first 3, faith, aspiration, and exertion, are not the actual antidotes to laziness. The actual antidote to laziness is the 4th one, pliancy. Pliancy is what overcomes laziness. However, to get to the point of pliancy, first of all, you must have developed faith in that concentration, in the benefits, in the qualities of concentration. If you have faith in those qualities, this will make you have the aspiration to obtain this concentration. And if you have the aspiration, this will make you put in the enthusiastic effort to develop it. And as a result of this, you will get the pliancy. By the time you have pliancy, you have overcome laziness. So the actual antidote is pliancy, but we need to have the full set of 4 as antidotes. Okay, so we talk about laziness and overcoming laziness, and we say that if actually you have the faith in the qualities of this concentration, you will aspire to do it. If you have the aspiration to do it, you will exert yourself to do it, and as a result of that, you will get pliancy. Pliancy comes both in terms of mental pliancy and physical pliancy. And when you have pliancy, means there is no resistance. It is very easy. It is very smooth, right? This is what pliancy means. It means you will not have sluggishness or heaviness, both in the physical and the mental department. So when you sit down to meditate, you will not have any of these impediments. So the actual antidote to laziness is pliancy. Another thing to pay attention to in that drawing is that the path that the elephant is following is not a straight path. It is a path that has curves and turns and different sections. Actually, this path has 6 sections or 6 curves. And the reason for that is because they symbolize the 6 powers. We said that the first mental placement is obtained through the power of hearing the instructions from your Lama. The second mental placement, which is the continuous setting, is the one that is obtained through the power of thinking. So at the beginning, you hear the instructions, and then you think about them again and again. And that repeated thinking, through the power of this repeated thinking, allows you to obtain the second level of mental placement. If we look at the name of the second mental placement, it is called continuous setting. So previous was setting, this one is continuous setting. So as the name indicates, we have obtained here some continuity. So it is only relative continuity. We can abide for a little bit longer compared to the first level where we had 0 continuity, didn't we? So remember, the first is obtained through the power of hearing. The second one is obtained through the power of thinking. So whatever instructions you have received, you keep engaging these instructions again and again. So you think about those things again and again. And that brings some improvement, because now you have managed to improve the duration of the time in which you have stability. So you have longer, more continuous abidance or stability with the focal object. And as we can see with the second elephant, the head of the elephant begins turning white. A section of this is white that indicates some abidance. All right, so as we say, the different sections of the path indicate the 6 different powers that we rely upon to obtain the 9 mental placements. The first mental placement is obtained through the power of hearing. The second is obtained through the power of thinking. The third and the fourth are obtained through the power of mindfulness. The fifth and the sixth are obtained through the power of introspection. The seventh and the eighth are obtained through the power of enthusiastic effort. And the ninth is obtained through the power of familiarity. Okay. All right. So today, as you can see, we have presented the 6 powers. There is quite a lot yet to present here in terms of the gradual development along the path. So Geshe was saying, I'm sorry, we stretched a little bit the session. We went 15 minutes or something over. So apologies that we ran a bit over time. Tomorrow, Geshe says, definitely I will try to finish the whole progression along the 6 curves of the path. So we do that tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you, Geshe.